Om Namah Shri Athirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine. Today we are here to celebrate the 150th birth anniversary of Sister Nivedita, the Irish disciple of Swami Vivekananda, and to celebrate her wonderful life, her life of great inspiration, iconic dedication, and draw inspiration from her words, her works. So we will extensively try to go through her life. I will tell it to you in the form of incidents. There are very many interesting incidents in her life and what we can learn from them. You see, Vivekananda was a Shakti worshipper. So wherever he went, he actually stirred up Shakti. Speaking of Swamiji, Sister Nivedita would get very emotional, especially in her later years after Vivekananda's passing. Whenever Sister Nivedita talked of Vivekananda, she would get quite emotional and she would say, he was born of Vireshwar. He was Vireshwar Shiv. He was Vireshwar Shiva himself. And that is why he manifested so much of strength and courage. That is why he stirs up strength and courage everywhere. And the brave of this world will follow Vivekananda. And she is standing example for this. The brave, the strong, the intelligent in this world will understand the worth of Swamiji. And this Swamiji, who was such, would get very emotional when he would talk of Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi. He couldn't talk much about Mother for long. He would get full of emotion. He would feel choked because he knew her worth. He considered her to be the Mahashakti coming in this simple guise. Look at Mother, simplicity incarnate, so unassuming. It appears like there's nothing special about her, but she was Mahashakti come in this very sattvic form with a very special message for this age. In one of his letters to Swami Shivananda, one of his brother disciples, Vivekananda's brother disciple, Swamiji writes, none of you have understood the significance of Mother's advent, but gradually you will know. Without Shakti, there is no revival for this world. And Mother has been born to revive that wonderful Shakti in India. And with her as the center, once more will Gargis and Maitreyis come into this world. So think of this power and how it came, how simply it lived, and what revolutions it's going to cause. Swamiji has predicted this, he has prophesied. It's a prophecy. So it's bound to happen. And that is why for his plan, in his plan of regeneration of India, Swamiji wanted two things. You know very well, Swamiji had planned for two mutts, Ramakrishna Mutt and Sarada Mutt. And the first on his list was actually Sarada Mutt. And his plan for the regeneration of this country was, first of all, he identified the causes for the degradation. The first cause, he said, was the neglect of the masses. The second cause, the neglect of women. Now, masses actually includes women. So the double emphasis is on neglect of women. And neglect of masses, today we have all the data available from that economic survey of the history of various nations. Angus Madison survey, I'm talking of that. In the year 2003, this survey was conducted ironically by a British historian only. And he gave us the data. How is it that a country which produced 24% of world GDP in 1700 came down to 4% of world GDP in 1900? What happened? Where did all the wealth go? And why was the country reduced to poverty? And why did not the wealth seep down to the common man? Neglect of the masses. Today we have all the data available as to what happened. Second was the neglect of women. About this, the lesser said the better. Because when education itself is removed from a person, it's like removing the light from one's eyes. What will a mind do if it is not trained by education? And so the country gradually became, you see, if women become seeped in superstition, all kinds of rigid customs, and are not given education, the country will follow the same, because the greatest influence of women is as mothers, and that influences the upcoming generations. So Swamiji saw clearly where the problem lay. So his solution for the regeneration of India, it highlighted the empowerment of women actually by education, because Swamiji understood it was through education that all these problems could be solved. And that is why he was looking out for educators. Among the small population of educated women of that time, you can say micro population, you know what the educational scenario was like? In 1900, the literacy rate among women was 1.5% in the country. 1.5% only, and amongst men it was 9%. Today the literacy rate among women is close to 70%, for men it is close to 80%. And in most of the institutes of higher education, the greater percentages of women, especially in Delhi and all these places. So the thing is, we can see how higher education is catching up among women, where the mind will engage itself. Swamiji saw that by removing education from Indian womanhood, although the culture was retained in a very deep way, the importance of education was not understood. And gradually the country was seeping down into superstition, into all sorts of malpractices. So Swamiji was on the lookout for educators. And he sent out appeals. He appealed to Srimati Sarada Ghoshal, the editor of Bharati at that time, to come forward and educate her less fortunate sisters. But the social conditions were such, Indian women themselves could not easily come out of their cocoon and help others. But the help came from totally unexpected quarters. Just imagine, from Ireland, in the form of Margaret Noble. If we actually see her life, it's a wonder how she could do what she did. She came to India not to patronize Indians. She did not come to take up a few special projects and help Indians. She came to become a daughter of India, one with the soil. She came to inherit this spiritual heritage. She came to dedicate herself to the service of its people. So her renunciation, I think there is no parallel in the history of India. Dedicating one's whole life to the cause of this country, that is what Sister Nivedita embodies. And that is why today you see in our 150th birth anniversary, all over the country how we are celebrating it. Indian parents take pride in giving this name to their daughters because it signifies dedication, courage, selflessness, service. This is what Sister Nivedita embodied. She was born in 1867 in Dungannon, Ireland, Tyrone County. And you see, she was not, Swamiji was born in 1863. She was just 4 years younger to Swamiji. But look at the transformation in her life. She was born to very noble parents. In fact, their title was Noble, Samuel Noble and Mary Noble. And the parents were of Scottish-Irish origin, and the father was a pastor. So the religious influence was on Margaret Noble right from childhood. And the mother was a very pious lady. She had vowed this first child to God, because in those days, you see, for a safe delivery, many women would do it. So little Margaret, even before she came on this earth, she was vowed to God. So when the girl was born, somehow the father intuited that this was a very special child, and somehow she would one day feel a greater call. And then he had told his wife, at that time we should not stand in her way. So he intuited the special role that Margaret Noble was to play in the future. And as she grew up, Margaret started going out with her father on his service outreach activities. So she saw all the benign aspects of religion, the Christian religion, the kindness, the service. And as she grew up, she developed a brilliant intellect. One characteristic of Margaret Noble was the brilliancy. Anything, any idea, she could dive to the depths of it and interpret it in a very novel, original way. Those of you who have gone through her works, you will understand this. Her works are like you can say they are like mirrors you can hold before every Indian to acquaint him with his own heritage. That is the beauty of the works of Nivedita. So as she grew, Nivedita's intellect was able to absorb a lot of knowledge. At the tender age of 17, she became a teacher. At the age of 25, she became the headmistress of a school in Wimbledon. And by that time, she was part of the intellectual circles in London. She was part of the Sesame Club, where high-level intellectuals of England like Bernard Shaw and Thomas Huxley were invited. And she herself became a powerful orator and writer. So you see, life was very beautiful for her, but there was this gnawing question within her. What is the purpose of life and what is the goal of life? What is truth, the truth about human life? So this question remained. She studied Buddhism, she studied various philosophical thoughts, and then she was, as it were, waiting for that higher call, and that call came into her life in the form of Swami Vivekananda in 1895. One fine morning, Margaret Noble received an invitation from a friend, Lady Isabel Margeson, inviting her to her home, where a talk was organized by this famous Hindu monk, Swami Vivekananda, who had created a stir in the Parliament of Religions a couple of years back. Now, Margaret Noble thought over it. Yes, this should be interesting, so let me go. And she went to her friend's house. There was a small circle of friends who had already collected there. And then they entered into the hall where Swamiji was sitting. Now look at her first impressions. Swamiji was sitting against the hearth fire, so the flames were burning behind him. And his face was all lit up. Swamiji was wearing that orange robe and chanting Shiva, Shiva, as he used to in his mellifluous voice. And then she has written the look he wore on his face. He wore the mingled look of gentleness and loftiness that one sees on the faces of those who live much in meditation. Look at her very first impression, her observation. Then they sat in a semicircle around Swamiji, and Swamiji turned towards them. He, as it were, appeared to be in a very high mood. And then he brought his mind down, turned towards them, and started talking about the Vedanta philosophy. He mainly explained the three paths to God, karma, bhakti and jnana. And then he started talking about the evolution of the human soul, the purpose of human life. It was a very impressive lecture. At the end of it, however, her friends who had come with her, they said, well, it was good, it was impressive, but we have heard these ideas before, it was not new. This reflects on the intellectual society of London at that time. But Nivedita simply could not dismiss the personality of Swamiji from her mind. She saw something very different in Swamiji. She saw the conviction of his ideas. She saw truth coming out of him. And she attended 2 more of his lectures. And then she was convinced that this man possessed truth. And this man had very deep convictions born of the realization of that truth. And Swamiji's astounding purity, she could actually feel it. And she understood there was very special in this personality. And then Swamiji left for the US. After about 5 months, he returned and conducted classes in London again, every one of which Margaret Noble attended. And she was no easy student. She was a very rebellious student. She questioned, she argued, and for long she studied under Swamiji for a few months. And at the end of it, she suddenly found herself calling him master. Her mind was able to take on the role of a disciple. She understood there was much to learn from this philosophy, and the most ideal teacher was given to her. And then one day, Swamiji suddenly made a statement which struck her very deeply. In the midst of a conversation, Swamiji was sitting on a chair, and he suddenly said, with thunderous conviction, she has written, what did he say? He said, you know what the world wants today? The world is in need of 20 men and women who can stand on the street yonder and declare that they possess nothing but God. Who will do this? And then he paused, he got up from his seat, took 2 steps and said, what is there to fear? If this be true, what else matters? And if this is not true, what do our lives matter? It means to say nothing matters other than God. These words penetrated into Margaret's soul, and immediately she wanted to say, yes, I will go, Swamiji. But she controlled herself. And then she went home and wrote to him that I am ready to dedicate my life for this cause. Will you guide me? When Swamiji got the letter, he hesitated a little. Because you see, an Irish woman, and where is India? And the climate of India, how will it suit her? If she dedicated her life and came to India, will the weather first of all suit her? Ireland is such a cold place and India is so hot. And then will this orthodox conservative society of those times accept her? What work will she do? Where will she stay? So many questions were there. So initially there was hesitation in Swamiji, and he also allowed some time for her to assimilate his ideas deeply so that it becomes part of her nature. Because Vedanta, you see, is not just about thinking. It's not about ideas. It's not about thought forms. It's not about intellectual gymnastics. Some amount of experience is required, some amount of inner detachment, ability to do dharana, a solid continuous thought flow on these ideas. And some form of elementary experience is required to be convinced of all this. So he waited, and Margaret also waited. But mildly she persisted. Then Swamiji returned to India, and after some time seeing the conditions here, he wrote to her that, yes, you may come. What was wanted was a real lioness, one who would work for the Indian people, especially for the education of the Indian women. So Margaret was jubilant. She records in her notes, you see, that's very beautiful. What was the urge that made her give up her wonderful, accomplished life and come to this country and serve it? And you see her words. Let me quote her words here. She says, she has written it in her diary, I had recognized the heroic fiber of this man and decided to make of myself a servant of his love for his people. And in doing this, it was to his character that I had thus paid obeisance. You see her temper, her bhav, her attitude to become a servant of his love for his people. Look at her spirit of renunciation. Is this easy to say? To go into a foreign country and serve it like a servant. As I told you, she did not come to patronize us. She did not come to take up a few projects. She came like a servant to serve and dedicated her whole life to this land. So her renunciation is enormous. She finally landed in India in January 1898, and Vivekananda was at the docks to receive her. She felt welcomed. And then began the second phase of her training. So long she had heard Swamiji's ideas. Here she could see the practical expression of it. And here she got an occasion to dive deep into herself and realize those ideas. One of the first things that Swamiji did for her was, he took her to Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi. That is a very wonderful event, because that was 17th March 1898 when Margaret Noble first saw Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi, and the very first words which Mother used were, my daughters, you have come. Look at Mother. In the midst of her orthodox setting, this ready acceptance at once. Mother's heart was like that. And Nivedita felt so touched, she became like a 5-year-old in front of Mother. In fact, Mother would call her Kuki. In Bengali, it means small child, daughter. And Nivedita would actually behave like that in front of her. And what did Mother do? Mother saw to it that Nivedita settled well. Mother completely accepted her because she was Vivekananda's daughter who had sacrificed everything for working in India. And it was actually this combination of mother and sister that created a big revolution. I will tell you how. Just like how Swamiji and Thakur, this combination created such a big revolution. Mother and sister, this combination worked so much, did so much for women's empowerment in India. Sister Nivedita was a pioneer in many fields, not just women's education. And because Mother accepted her totally, this movement, you can say Sarada movement, it's part of this movement, it came up. Because it was to Sister Nivedita that Swamiji had first pointed out where the women's mutt would come up. Just imagine, when even the ideas were not there in the minds of people, Swamiji had pointed out the land, that Suradhuni Kanan. It was Sister Nivedita's school, which was the first cradle of Sri Sarada Mutt. The first monastics actually gathered there, and they lived a period, austere life there before Sarada Mutt was created, and later they shifted to this mutt. So even today we call Nivedita school Adi Mutt. It was the cradle of Sri Sarada Mutt. And Sister Nivedita was an icon of inspiration and renunciation for our girls. So you see, this combination of mother and sister is unique in Indian history again. And it paved the way for an enormous women's movement, unprecedented in the history of time. When Nivedita first came to Mother, people would see certain strange things. Like, for example, her devotion to Mother. Once one person came into Mother's house at Udbodhan, and he saw Nivedita take a mat, and she was dusting it very clean, completely clean. And then she kissed it and placed it on the ground. Why? Because Mother would sit on it. Her every action showed the devotion she felt for Mother. She would come on weekends. Her home was close to Mother's home. She would come on weekends and she would polish the doors and windows in such a way they would shine. So people would know that Nivedita had come and done this for Mother. And what little things she gave Mother, Mother preserved it with such care. Mother would say, no, my cookie has given it. Even if somebody wanted to remove it from Mother's baggage, Mother would say, no, Nivedita has given me this. This has to be preserved. And there was beautiful correspondence between the two of them. Mother felt something very special for Nivedita. And Nivedita was totally attached to Mother. In her very first observation of Mother, she has written, even this record is there, she has written, Mother is, in the simplest and most unassuming guise, the greatest of women on this earth. The very first observation, this record is there. So you see, it takes a soul like Nivedita to understand what Mother was. Swamiji understood, Nivedita understood, and all these great ones naturally felt that in Mother's presence. So this is how Mother accepted Nivedita fully. And this created a revolution in the society of that time. Because you see, even the school which Nivedita started was inaugurated by Mother. Anyway, this is regarding Nivedita's coming to Mother. But the next phase is her Brahmacharya Diksha from Swamiji. Because on 25th March, you see, just a few months after she came to India, Swamiji initiated her into Brahmacharya and gave her the name of Nivedita. What an apt name. The offered one, the dedicated one who gave her everything for this country. And today we take such pride in giving our daughters that name. So this name has become holy forever by the power of her renunciation. After this, Swamiji went on a tour to the Himalayas, in which he took Nivedita also and some other Western disciples. It was a period of seclusion, it was a period of spiritual practice, and Nivedita had deep spiritual experiences, which she has recorded in her notes on some wanderings with Swami Vivekananda. Sometimes she felt a deep silence, sometimes she intuited a vast good. These are the words she has used, because the experiences she had, she could not express it fully. Spiritual experience has that nature, you see, it's ineffable. It can't be readily expressed in words. But the deep transformation of her life is proof that there was very deep spiritual experience. One day, Swamiji touched her head with his hand, and that sent her into a very deep state of meditation. Swamiji had given her a poem in which he had written, "Be thou to India's future son, mistress, servant, friend in one." So this metamorphosis, this transformation at Swamiji's feet actually made her that. She actually served Indians like that. So after this phase of spiritual practice began her great karma yoga in India. It began with her school. in November 1898, the very year in which she came to India. You see, in the November 13th was the exact date, because that was Kali Puja day. And that day, mother came to the school and performed the puja. You saw it just now, all these wonderful children, how they enacted it for us. She performed the puja and pronounced words of blessing for that school. Her words of blessing were, may the Divine Mother bless this school and may the girls it trains become ideal girls. So Nivedita was jubilant because she said this is the best omen for the future educated Indian womanhood. That time her school was called the Ramakrishna School for Girls. And yesterday only we were discussing with the teachers the unique educational methods of Nivedita. See, in this, really she has, I would say, no parallel. And the educational methods which she introduced, even today we are not using them. Like, for example, the way she inspired creativity. Her training of feeling, she always insisted on this, that if feeling faculty in human beings is not trained, then you are not training, you are just training 1/3 of the individual, because thinking, feeling and willing are our 3 faculties. If you only train analytical thinking, you train only a bit of the person. So like this, there are very innovative methods in her educational techniques, which we discussed yesterday. But the main point is she effectively combined the best of the East and the West. Because you see, she had been a teacher in England and she had absorbed Froebel's and Pestalozzi's educational techniques and methods while in England. They were the new education techniques of that age. And she was trained in the Indian spiritual heritage by none but Vivekananda. So she absorbed the best of both cultures. She embodied the best of both cultures. You know, her girls, just looking at her, they saw a combination of energy and contemplation. They saw the best of the East and the West. So even today, she actually stands as a role model before our girls. She's a role model for our Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. You saw it just now, how the girls showed us, how the children showed us. She's a role model for our Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao campaign of Government of India. How to empower the girl child through education. She's a role model in many ways. In this school, she worked out best how this combination can take place. Actually, if you see this transition phase of Indian womanhood, many are asking for this combination. So for them, she's an instant appeal. Wherever I have spoken on Sister Nivedita, the girls like it very much. Because somehow she inspires. Once Vivekananda had told about her, India shall ring with Nivedita. So it is actually in a way happening. Look at the way we are celebrating her 150th birth anniversary. So this is regarding her unique educational methods. Another role which she played, which we saw also just now, was during the plague relief of 1899. When plague struck Kolkata in the summer of 1899, immediately the Ramakrishna Mission instituted a committee and plunged into the relief. Sister Nivedita was part of that committee. And you know what she did? She took up a big broom and started cleaning the streets of Bagh Bazaar. Those of you who have been to Bagh Bazaar, today it's a beautiful area, a huge extension. At that time it was a huge slum. And she was found in every street of that slum with this huge broom in hand, cleaning the streets, removing the sewage. She was found in the homes of the patients of plague, balancing on a ladder and painting their walls with disinfectant. She was found teaching the people about hygiene. And whenever, you know what she saw the women around doing, they would clean their homes and dump all the rubbish on the street. So then how would plague be eradicated? She went on cleaning the streets. And then young men, as you just saw, they came forward and said, no sister, this is our work, let us do it. So this is the way she inspired all the young people there to take up the work. She had a meager diet of mainly fruits and milk, because the heat of Kolkata, you see, she couldn't stand. And she would turn red all over. But the work continued. The work was never affected. And during this time, during the outbreak of plague, she kept that milk also aside for the patients of plague. That is why Rabindranath Tagore called her Lokamata. She has served the people like a mother. You see, in how many ways we can take inspiration from this Irish lady and the extent of her dedication. So this is another role which she has played. Next thing we can see about her is how she became one with the people. Once she was cooking her meal let me tell you some very interesting incidents from her life. She was cooking her meal in her Bagh Bazaar home when she suddenly heard a loud wail in the neighborhood. Immediately she kept aside what she was cooking. She rushed downstairs and she tried to find from which home the sobs were coming out. And she entered a hut and she saw there a small girl was lying flat. She had actually died. And her young mother, the mother herself was very young, she was wailing over the child. Nivedita quietly went and sat near the mother, and the mother cried out, "Where has my child gone? What will I do now?" And Nivedita whispered into her ear, "Hush, mother, your daughter is with Mother Kali. Don't worry about her." And then she embraced the young mother, and she records in her diary that with that embrace came the union of the Eastern and Western. You see, today we are living in a global village. At that time, the two cultures considered themselves different. In a way, she united the two cultures. And she has written that the unfathomed depths of consolation of the world heart were united through these experiences like these. This is how Indian society started accepting Nivedita fully. There are very many such beautiful incidents in her life. She never criticized a single custom. She was considered an outcast at that time in society. She never spoke against it. She never felt hurt by it. In fact, she respected the custom. She held herself at a distance. She remained in the background. She saw to it that her girls picked up every bit of their heritage. Just imagine the condition. I remember there's one special incident. Mother Kali was her Ishta, her chosen deity. And she would go to the Kali temple, take her girls also, but she was not allowed into the temple. So what she would do, she would usher her girls in and she would wind her way through the Chandni Ghat, go behind the Mandir, stand there and pray to Mother Kali with tears in her eyes. Long time she would stand there and her girls would find her there. One of those girls was Parul, who later became the first president of Sarada Mat, Pravrajika Prana Mataji. She was a student of Nivedita, and she records in her reminiscences, "I found sister like this standing at the far end of the Kali temple, and I really tell you, I do not know if anybody was more fit to enter the temple than Nivedita." This was the picture people got from Nivedita's dedicated life. And this is just one incident. You see, I will give you some incidents. India's struggle for selfhood and nationhood, it found one of the greatest supports in this Irish woman. It found the greatest support in her because, you see, that was a time when Indian intellectuals were struggling to see where the unity of India lies. And this is in 1902. And that was a time when the British government was busy convincing Indians that, well, India is not exactly a nation, it's a collection of kingdoms, and it is their introduction of the English language and railways and postage that was actually uniting India. All these ideas were very prevalent. And the Indians were struggling because there actually was no political unity as such in the past, but there was a cultural, spiritual unity always. And so India was always united. And it was Sister Nivedita who very vehemently pointed this out. In 1902, she was invited here to Madras, Pachayappa's hall in Madras. YMHA, Young Men's Hindu Association, invited her. They had heard of her work in Kolkata and they wanted to hear her. So they invited her here, and a large crowd of educated Hindus had gathered. They wanted to see what she will say, how she is such an inspiration to our revolutionaries in Kolkata. And the very way in which Nivedita entered that hall, it touched all of them. You see, she used to wear that flowing robe and the Rudraksha beads around her neck. She came and stood before them like a goddess, a steady gaze in her eyes. Immense willpower and intellect was shining forth. And then she said, the first thing she did was, she sent out a prayer to Lord Shiva. The second thing she did was, she sent out a salutation to her Guru, Swami Vivekananda. And then she started speaking fire. She told them, National unity. How can you even think of that there is no national unity in India? India was always united and no external agent has come to unite her. If India had not been always united, you can never unite her. You have had a common culture, you have had a common ethos, you have a common home. How can you say you are not united? Let me quote her own words. She said, India is one, indivisible, indissoluble. National unity is built on the common home, the common interest and the common love of the Indian people. So never doubt that India is already a nation. When Indians themselves were doubting, Indian intellectuals, Nivedita proclaimed this. This was one of her best speeches. And then she fired all parents. She said, it is because you don't teach your children the essential unity of India that today you are doubting the value of India as a nation, as a united whole, which it has been from times immemorial. She said, we must surround our children with the thought of India. We must demand from them sacrifices for India and make them take pride in those sacrifices. We must demand from them bhakti for India, Gyan for India, India for the sake of India. Let this be our motto. So this simply blew away the audience. Her fire, her absolute sincerity in speaking in this wise. And so you see, she was a big inspiration to all the prime freedom fighters in Bengal at that time. Rabindranath Tagore, Aurobindo Ghosh, Chittaranjan Das, Bipin Chandra Pal, Subramaniam Bharati of the South, and then so many others, Gopal Krishna Gokhale and Ramanand Chatterjee, Raj Bihari Ghosh. All of these, they came into close contact with her and took the inspiration, took the cue from her, how to fight for the freedom of the nation. And not just these, hundreds of young revolutionaries she has inspired because she was part of the Anushilan Samiti. You see, a 5-member revolutionary committee was formed by Aurobindo. And it later became the Anushilan Samiti, but Nivedita was one of the members of this committee. And so a number of young revolutionaries, Bengal was very famous for all the revolutionary movements. If you study the revolutionary history of Bengal, you will find that this Anushilan Samiti played a very big role. And their inspiration was Sister Nivedita. She protected those young boys who came to her for help, for inspiration. She protected them from the police. She gave them refuge in her own home in that 16 Bospada Lane, which is today a museum on Sister Nivedita. She fed them. She taught them how to love the nation. She supported their views and she inspired them. This is the role she has played in India's freedom. In some ways, we have marginalized the different roles she has played. But if you actually study her life, you know what was her age at that time? She was a 35-year-old woman, a young woman coming from the colonizer. And she stood all for India. She dedicated her life for India. You see, she was Irish by birth, but English by education. And yet she understood the value of the glorious Indian heritage and the need to bring political freedom to this country, because she used to say Swamiji's idea of man-making will become practical only if we first focus on nation-making. Otherwise, you cannot make vast decisions in India without political freedom. So she worked for the freedom movement. Let me give you another incident here. You see, she had a militant nature. When she conceived an idea, she applied all her energy and force to it. Once she was attending a meeting in the University of Calcutta. It was actually the convocatory meeting, and Lord Curzon was giving the convocatory address. And in the course of his talk, he suddenly said, truth has been given a greater place in the moral codes of the West before it was similarly accepted in the East. And this, all the educated Indians there were hurt by this statement, but Nivedita was furious. She turned red, and then she just waited for the talk to be over, and immediately after the talk ended, she caught hold of Gurudas Banerjee, who was there, and took him to the Imperial Library. She pulled out a book. The name of the book is Problems of the Far East. In that book, Lord Curzon had himself mentioned how he had lied about some personal details to the Korean Foreign Office. In those days, passport office was called foreign office. So there he had given some wrong information about his age and his marriage and some personal details, and with pride he described it. She pulled out that passage from that book, and next day in Anand Bazar Patrika, both these passages, this passage as well as his convocatory address appeared. So that the people should know, a man who's laying such claim to truth, he himself has lied and he's taking pride in it. And the next day this was translated into English, appeared in the Statesman with her comments. This was Nivedita. And she didn't stop at this. She herself wrote an article in the Statesman called The Highest Ideal of Truth, in which she showed example after example from our Puranas, from our epics, as to how truth was held in India. Sri Ramchandra's very purpose of going to the forest was to keep the truth of his word. How can you say truth was not respected in the East? So she gave all these examples and brought out a tremendous, powerful article which affected the whole country. This was Nivedita. And of course, she did not spare the students of that convocation. She gathered them all together and fired them. She told them that, how did you bear those statements in such a faultless silence? This was Nivedita. So you see, the spirit has come out in so many ways, all for the cause of this country, this nation. Another role which Nivedita has played is very interesting. You know, she was the unofficial, undeclared cultural ambassador of this country. She carried the culture of this country wherever she went and gave it so much value. When she was in England, when she was in America, she spoke about our scriptural heritage. She spoke about the Ramayana. She spoke about the lives of Sita and Ram. She would tell them, how can you call these people illiterate? They are more educated than we are because they have ideas like Sri Ram, Sri Sita. Can you imagine it? So they may be illiterate in your sense, but they are not uneducated. With these words, she defended our culture. There's one very interesting incident in her school. One day she asked her girls, who's the Queen of India? There was some hesitation. And then one little girl, after a pause, she said, Queen Victoria is the Queen of India. And Nivedita turned red in face again. She said, what? Mother Sita is your queen. Only Mother Sita can be the Queen of India. She who lived and died for an ideal. She is the Queen of India. Make no mistake about this. Consider this today. We talk so much about women's empowerment and this and that. Have we highlighted these great ideals of our heritage in our own lives? Do we inspire our youngsters with these great ideals? Nivedita did this for us 120 years back. And with what words? She held Indian cultural ideals to be a parenthesis par excellence meant to safeguard the values of family and social life. She used to tell her girls, a woman's highest education is her passionate love for Sita and Savitri. When Swamiji spoke of empowerment, you know, the word empowerment is not there in Sanskrit. Why? In India, women are considered Shakti themselves. They are representatives of that Mahashakti. How will you empower power? So empowerment is not the idea. Facilitate their highest expressions. This is the idea of empowerment in India. Make way for that divinity to come out. Create a culture where that divinity can be expressed. Create a value system where the highest in a woman can come out. This is the real meaning of empowerment. And that is why Nivedita becomes such a wonderful interpreter of Swamiji's message, isn't it? If you read her works, you will see she has contributed heavily to the understanding of our own heritage. And that is why her works, although her sentences are very long and sometimes they are a little puzzling, they are so long, but the content, what she means to say, is so valuable. Amongst her writings, her famous books were, first of all, The Web of Indian Life. You know, this book, at a time when Indian culture was misunderstood, India was misunderstood in so many ways, this book helped a lot because it gave the true, authentic picture of Hindu life and social life in India. Her other works like Cradle Tales of Hinduism, Footfalls of Indian History, Kali the Mother, that small book, The Master as I Saw Him, all these are masterpieces. of Indian culture, Indian heritage, our history. And you know, it was given to her to write the introduction to the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. Swami Brahmananda, the first president of the Ramakrishna order, requested her to write it. And what a marvelous piece she has written. In that she describes Swamiji's complete works as the new charter of the Hindu faith. The complete works of Swamiji is the new charter of Hinduism. And she considered herself to be a bridge between Vivekananda and his people, a transmitter of his ideas, so that the people will make good his dreams. She used to take pride in this role. And then, not just in writing, you know, she has defended and encouraged Indian painting, this indigenous form of Indian art, like nobody ever has. She was an inspiration to Indian artists like Nandalal Bose, Avanindranath Tagore, Asit Haldar, all this because she said, your art is primarily symbolic. Western art is not symbolic. So hold on to yours and develop that. And through her inspiration, wonderful paintings came out from the brush of Avanindranath Tagore, Nandalal Bose. You can see it all over Bengal. It was with the inspiration of Nivedita. One day when they were hesitating, you know what she did? She just put 2 tickets into their hands. She sent them to Ajanta. See those cave paintings. You will understand the glory of your own art. This is how she used to work. Encouragement at every level. Bringing out the glory of India, the Indian heritage, and inspiring Indians with them. The energy she has put into all these words, all these works is enormous. And that is why you see, what are the roles she has played in Indian nationalism? Vast role. In women's education, she was of course a pioneer in women's education. It was not that girls' education had not started, but these methods of education which she brought, they were really unique by all standards. And then she was a great defender of our heritage, as I told you. She was a wonderful writer who brought the true picture out to India. It helped in counteracting the false propaganda against Hinduism, against Indian culture. And she was a great writer who encouraged all forms of indigenous art forms and writing. And she stood by the people through all phases. Whenever there was suffering, whenever, as you saw in that plague relief, she was always for the people. She was always for nation making. How many roles this young woman has played, just imagine, and how she must have felt for the nation. That is why, you know, Bipin Chandra Pal, he once said, I do not know if any Indian loved India as much as Nivedita did. What a thing to say, just imagine. I do not know if any Indian loved India more. And Rash Bihari Ghosh, he writes in one place that if the dry bones are beginning to stir in India, it is because Nivedita breathed life into them. Her role in Indian nationalism was immense. And the tributes paid to her, yes, tributes have been paid to her. Rabindranath Tagore gave her the title of Lokmata. Swamiji, you know what Swamiji used to call her? The greatest tributes have been paid by Swamiji himself. He has written in the letter, a lioness is required. First tribute. Second tribute, he says, you have in you the makings of a world mover. Look at the faith in Nivedita. Third tribute, he wrote to Swami Swarupananji Maharaj, she is a real acquisition. And in mother's eyes, she had the soul of a goddess. So she was her cookie. My daughter. If mother addresses somebody as daughter, well, that's the greatest possible tribute. So this tribute she got from mother. And then, of course, others have also paid their tributes, like Aurobindo. He used to call her Shikhamai, a flame of light. She was actually like a flame of light. And Jagdish Chandra Bose used to call her Lady with the Lamp. She was the Indian Florence Nightingale, you can say, the Lady with the Lamp. Avanindranath Tagore called her Mahashweta. So in various ways, tributes have been paid to her. In her centenary year, a stamp was released with her picture in her name. The West Bengal Secondary Board of Education has been named after Sister Nivedita. And then a number of schools, parks, colleges have been named after her. Girls are being given her names. We are celebrating her birth anniversaries in this manner. But you know, the greatest tribute is always taking up the ideals of their lives. If we can take this into our lives, I think that is paying the greatest tribute. There are two main things which we can take from Nivedita. What we are going to take home should be at least these two things. One is her spirit of high idealism. Human life has a purpose. If that purpose is not fulfilled, we will die without fulfillment. Human life has a very elevated purpose. Our energy should be geared to that higher purpose. In Nivedita's life, her motto was, nothing easy, nothing cheap. This was her motto. This is found in her writings. And so, firing oneself with a high idealism, making sure that every day we dwell on these high ideals and make something valuable of our lives, this is our responsibility. This is the first thing we can take from Nivedita. The second thing is her iconic spirit of dedication. When I know I have a high ideal in life, I must bring my energies to work for that ideal. That is dedication. If I can do that, it appears like dedication on the objective end. But it is actually a fulfillment from my part. So for Nivedita, dedication was like that. And that is why you see she functions as a perfect role model for our modern girls. All of you will agree, enormous transition phase in Indian womanhood. That shy, reticent, unassuming womanhood of yesterday, making way for the accomplishing women of today. And this enormous transition requires stirring role models of integrity and character. And Nivedita, in all the glory of her renunciation, becomes such a stirring role model for our young girls. What is it that your young daughters want today? Tell me. They want to stay rooted to their heritage. At the same time, they want to take the best that the world has to offer. And that is why they need role models which have effectively combined these two. And this is where Nivedita stands as a shining exemplar, a synthesizer of values for emergent India, and a real inspiration, a role model for our girls. So these are the two things we will take from Sister's life. It is my prayer on this 150th birth anniversary to Sister that she inspire us from within, with her life, with her words, and her spirit of iconic dedication and high idealism enter into us. Thank you very much.